Hello and welcome to my channel. Well, you may look at the title of this video, which I haven't even decided yet, but I know what the theme is. And you may think, well, he's a hypocrite because I know he's been unsafe with knives before. Well, yes. Yes, I have. And that's why this one is, I'm not saying, well, I am an expert on what not to do with a knife, because I've done it so many times. Eventually learn your lesson, but even then you slip. And so what I'm basically going to try to cover here is some knife safety tips from a person who's violated every one of those knife safety tips. And the main purpose of this is not to say, look how knowledgeable I am, I know so much about this topic. It's learn from my mistakes. Like when my father would sit there and tell me something, eventually you would reach the process where you would realize that, hey, the thing he just told you not to do, he just did. And when I question him about it, he'd say, do as I say, not as I do. And mine is not do as I say. Mine is just, all of this is advice and suggestions. You can take it or leave it. And it's not going to be totally and 100% comprehensive, but there are a few areas where I catch myself, where I've cut myself or almost cut myself pretty bad, basically because of, there's several factors behind when an accident occurs. And usually one of the things is speed and convenience. You know, you're trying to do something fast. You think you know where something is, or another thing is you're not knowledgeable with the tool you're using. You haven't had experience with it. For example, with knives, you know, maybe it's a new type of locking or unlocking mechanism that you're not aware of, or it operates, you know, differently. Like this knife right here, it's a slip joint. It has no, they call it a folder for a reason, because it can fold on you. Whereas this type right here is like an early version of a liner lock, which is what it is. You look at it, it's a liner lock. And so this knife can be used in some ways that this knife couldn't. And one of them is a poking or stabbing motion. And people might say, well, you know, I wouldn't do that or whatever. And they think it's like self-defense. Well, you know, there's a lot of stuff you would do in a farm or something. You might want to stab into a bale of something and open it up or cut it open. You know, there's a reason why there's a point on a knife, and it's not always self-defense, but it is for piercing. Piercing is a valid thing to do, but you have to grip your knife properly for it. You have to use the proper knife for the job. But let me use this one as an example right here as one of the first ones. Underestimating the damage that a knife can do based upon its size. You know, if you look at this one, instinctively you might say, well, man, that's a big old blade, and that's got a lot of sharp edges on it. I better be careful. You know, you look at a tiny knife like this, a little over an inch blade on it, you know? That thing's so tiny, it couldn't do anything. I learned my lesson on this one right here. Where is it? That's that V-shaped scar right there. That is from this knife right here. I violated one of the rules. I mean, it's a rule, it's a safety rule, but there are exceptions sometimes on things. Like one of the things is never cut toward yourself. Well, that's not true, because there are such things as draw cuts. There are draw knives and stuff. There are times when you pull. You just have to be aware that you're going to increase the danger if you're cutting toward yourself. Now, here is a combination of a couple of things that got me on that one. One is plastic. Know the material that you're cutting. I'm not going to put it, like if I put any numbers up here, it'll just be to organize myself. It's not in priorities. You can take or leave any of these. But the material you're cutting and your backdrop. What I mean by your backdrop, it's just like if you're shooting a firearm or something, you want to be aware of not only your target, but what's behind your target in case you miss. And that's the same way with cutting. Where is that force going to go when it releases, when it finally cuts through? And plastic is especially tricky because you're going to meet, if you're cutting through this, you're going to meet a lot of resistance and then none. You see how that happens? And then none. And when that then none happens, if you've been holding something like this and you're cutting, I think I was doing something like that. I was trying to cut a piece of plastic and it was way back here. I thought it was safe. But because there was so much force, when it released, it went bam! And you know what stopped it? My bone. It cut to the bone down here. Luckily, I guess I missed tendons or nerves, because they usually run along over here. But I missed all that, so I didn't get any nerve damage. This is a burn right here on my finger. But it went like that and jabbed me. I underestimated that it was a small knife, that it couldn't do much. I violated I could have cut. The thing is, it's not never. If you've got an option, if you've got a choice, and you've got an option, just be aware of where it's going to go. It's just, I'm not an expert on axes and stuff, but I've seen this happen before, is you go to chop something, and you miss, and where is it going to go? It's going to go right towards your ankle, or your leg, or your calf, or something, and with an axe, and with that much mass, even a hatchet, it's a cutting implement also, bam, all of a sudden you are the backdrop. And that's fine if everything's working fine. If you always hit your mark, or you stop before it's going to completely release, you start easing up your pressure or whatever. But that's just one of them. That's always, I'm sure you've heard before, and people always say that, never cut towards yourself. It's just, never cut towards yourself, I would add, if you've got other options. But sometimes the best cut is towards yourself. But, a draw knife is usually like both hands are sitting over here, and there's a blade, and you pull it like a plane, all right? So you've got a big chunk of wood here or something, and if you miss, you got both your hands to protect you, and as long as there's nothing up here when you miss, it's fine. But, I mean, that's one of them, is underestimating the size of the knife. All right, here's another one. I'm not going to demonstrate this or anything, but convenience. With a folding knife, a lot of times, with this, all you got to do is close it. Where there are ways of closing this knife that if anybody is grown up in the 60s or even 70s and stuff, has probably seen this. The way that they close this knife is to take the back of here. There's nobody downstairs. Take the knife and close it on here's the back of your leg, and you fold it on the back of your leg like that. All right. I know somebody that sent themselves to the hospital because they stabbed themselves in the butt. They didn't estimate where their butt was correctly or whatever, but they had like a seahorse whittler, the Rough Rider seahorse whittler, and they were going to close the blade on the back of their leg, and then they wound up stabbing themselves in the butt. And you would think, that's kind of it's a Warncliffe looking blade, it's kind of small. Put him in a hospital. Put him in a hospital with stitches for a while. He bled, a lot. So that's another thing, is you're trying to do something for convenience. You only got one hand and you want to close the blade. Well, don't close it on yourself. I mean, I've done it before and I've gotten away with it many times, but it's out of your sight. That's one of the other things. When you're closing a blade, it's out of your sight. And that can be applied to Let me get this guy off. Knives, fixed blade knives, resheathing it. You sit there, you pull it out, and instead of using your thumb, you know, to guide it in and everything else, you do something wrong, and you think you know where it is, and this is appendix carry or whatever. You're about to take your appendix out, you know, or come close to it, you know, because you're not looking at what you're doing, and for convenience sake, you just think you know where it is, and you wind up sheathing it, not in the holster, but in yourself. And I've come close to doing that, because sometimes you can think you're in the sheath, and you're not. You're on, you know, the belt or the other side of it. The best thing to do is to stop and take time and look at what you're doing. You know, just look down at your hands and sit there and resheath it. It may be inconvenient, it may slow you down, but the amount of time you save and the amount of money you save from not going to the hospital and not opening yourself up is worth it, I think. You know, that's one of the things right there. And I mention it quite often because I'll be walking and filming, and that's another thing, you know, you're trying to do two things at once. You got one hand doing this and one hand doing that. It's just, again, be aware of what happens if whatever you're cutting, you know, happens to go. And this hand is in the path because you're trying to be octopus arms or whatever, or multitask a little too much. Anytime you got a blade, you should concentrate on just that alone and work on what you're cutting. It's not going to take you long if you're cutting something unless you're doing a steady, tedious task. And then you probably, if you're like you're a chef or anything else, you can talk and cut vegetables at the same time probably, you know. But if you're not experienced with it and stuff, and you're sitting there and you're not curling your fingers back the way they do, you know, with this stuff. And you're doing like this, and somebody asks you a question, and you look up, and you're still trying to multitask, and you're going on instinct. Ping! Johnny Three Fingers, you know. Accidents, again, you're not paying attention to what you're doing when you should. So that's another one. Again, the locking mechanism, like a slip joint, you never want to get it. This is an excellent example. It's a very long blade that gives you leverage, all right, against this pivot point. And the only thing that's holding it is the friction of the back spring. So if you're sitting here going like this, and you meet something like this paper that you're stabbing, and you're using so much force that you meet the backdrop, which is, say, wood or a wall or something like this, and the force is going like this, if you're not exactly centered with it and everything, even then, the blade is going to want to fold. And because it's got so much force of you pushing and the way you've got it held, bam, it's going to close right on your fingers. And that's why a lot of people don't like slip joint knives. They blame the knife for their stupidity. That's what it is, basically. Stupidity, ignorance, either one you want to call it. Ignorance is you just didn't know that you shouldn't do that, and stupidity is usually one that gets me, is you knew you shouldn't have done it, but you did it anyway. And it's going to bite you, you know, it's going to bite you in the hand. Now, again, always, one of the things you should always be prepared for is a lot of blood coming out of your hand or some extremity. Know how to stop bleeding, and that's usually one of the first things is immediate pressure. You want to apply immediate pressure if it's you have to know what type of cut you got to. If it's gushing and everything, yeah, that's serious. You know, you've hit an artery, and you better get that thing tourniqueted off. You know, learn how to use a tourniquet and stuff. A tourniquet can be as simple as a rope with a slip knot on it and a cinch knot at the end. You can use your belt and stuff like that in an emergency. Bandana, wrap it around, you know. You've seen that in westerns where they do that. It works because you can bleed out. Your human body can only take so much loss of blood before you lose blood pressure. And if you hadn't staunched the flow, well, you don't, platelets can't clot that quick, you know. Anyways, that's one thing, knowing the mechanism type. The other way you usually get yourself is showing off. For example, you know, one of the old ways of getting a slip joint to come open is to hold it like this, you know, and the weight of the knife usually work much better on like a buck 110. But you take the weight of the knife, you'd hold the blade, and you go like this, and bam, and if you did it right, it would pop out like this. If you did it wrong, the blade's going to come out of your hand. And with the blade coming out of your hand, that's another thing. That's another safety tip that everybody tells you that's going to be very hard to do because it's instinctive. Never catch a blade that's falling. Never try to catch a blade that's falling. If it's sitting there, what you want to be is, especially in my case, is like a cat. The first thing you want to do is move your feet out of the way, because gravity, it's going down. It's going to follow gravity. So get your feet out of the way, because in my case, they're probably bare feet, unless it's cold, and then I might have socks on. But I don't usually have shoes on, and the mass of the knife and everything else coming down just from waist height can be enough. It depends on where it sticks you. You can survive, you know, a knife stick in the foot. I've survived more than one. But it depends on where it hits. If it hits a tendon or something like that, it can be serious. If it gets infected and you don't take care of it or don't go to the hospital, it could be really serious. So that's another one, is just showing off and everything, playing tricks. Like you've got a balisong knife and you've never used one before, and you're doing all these tricks. It's just like nunchucks, you know. That stuff looks good on TV and stuff, Bruce Lee doing all that stuff, but unless you're experienced with it, you're going to beat the hell out of yourself with a stick trying to learn this stuff. And that's safe. That's with a stick. With something like a balisong or something like that, get a trainer. It's the same way. If you see some trick, you see some move, somebody's got a Bowie knife and they go, woo, woo, oh, that looks cool, that looks awesome and everything. Practice without using a sharp knife. Get a rubber training knife, or even a baton, you know, piece of wood or something like that. Practice with that first. You get it down with that, then it's up to you. But again, that's a good way to get yourself cut. It's just something that's flashy, showy, you know, like knife twirling. Look at that. Look how fancy that is. What practical use does that? Well, if it's entertaining for you, that's fine. That's just like, you know, sword swallowing or whatever. If you want to do that, that's fine. I'm not going to do that, you know. No thanks. Juggling chainsaws or juggling Bowie knives or whatever, all those things, you just got to be aware that the people that do that stuff have practiced a lot and probably have got scars or lack of appendages to show for it if they're still alive. Because again, what is the purpose of what you're doing? It's either convenience or show off or something like that. And if you're doing for that reasons, then you just got to be aware, and you're going to learn sooner or later. Another one is when you're using the improper tool for the job. You know, like you're using a knife as a pry bar or something else, and again, you don't know what's going to happen when that thing breaks because you're not expecting it to break. And so when this thing breaks, if you're levering a particular way, what's left of the knife can still cut you. It can still do damage. Even with a multi-tool, I've made this mistake. You're using the wrong thing on a multi-tool. For convenience sake, I was using the smallest. This is not my original Leatherman. This was gifted to me. But the smallest, this one right here, I was using this guy as a pry bar, not as a thing that it was supposed to be used as a pry bar, because it was convenient. And I was using it at work because I didn't have the proper tool for what I needed to do, which is there was a punch-out piece of metal in there, and you had to remove that before you installed the valves, or this loose piece of metal would be floating around in there and eventually clog things up and things wouldn't work. So that was vitally important. And I used this, and it broke the tip of it off. Well, it's the same way with a knife. When you're trying to use it as a screwdriver, and with Leatherman, you could take this off, you can buy another tool, and bam, you're back in work and everything. But you had the right tool and everything, but just because this other one worked better. The thing is, never use your own tools at a job if you've got a choice. If they've got like a cheesy box cutter, use it. If you have to use an M-Tech knife, use it. Unless you want to get the experience. Like I understand, I'm a knife person, and I've been in factories and stuff, and you get a lot of experience cutting things like plastic bands and stuff like that. That's where I first learned about plastic bands. Is like, wow, man, this thing, a semi-serrated knife, really works well for that, because you can saw with it, and then you're not really, with a straight edge blade. If you run into really tough material, it's just the sharpness of your knife, and even then you're gonna have to do a little bit of sawing, and that type of edge is not really good going through tough material, like that. Whereas a serrated one it was a Gerber ATS-34 Easy Out, but it was serrated right here and then regular like that. And what I would do is use that part to start it, the cut, and then get the sharp part in and finish it. And if I did it right, I could cut, like a 1-inch band, plastic banding thing, fairly easy without maybe the first time. Sometimes, not as much sawing. But anyway, it's just use the right tool for the job. Same way with a Swiss Army knife. Just be aware of the type of locking mechanism you're using. And also, any type of locking mechanism can fail. Don't just be so caught up in the hype of, you watch a video and they're putting 300-pound weights on the back of the lock, and you say, wow, this thing's never going to fail. I can do something stupid with it. Well, what if that one knife that you've got just had a micro fracture in the locking mechanism bar or something, or the pivot, and it's just 1 in 1,000 or whatever, and nobody would really notice it under normal use, but you got a bad part, and bam, the lock didn't work, and there went your fingers, or you're up a tree, I guess, climbing up a tree, stabbing it up. You slip and fell to your death, all because you were trusting that lock. You only weighed 150 pounds, and it was a 300-pound lock. Logic would tell you you've got enough safety factor there that you should be able to do that without any problem. But logic doesn't always work sometimes. Or logic doesn't take into account variables, If this thing's built right, if this thing's built correctly, ooh, there's a big variable right there. There's a lot of things that could be hidden in a knife. The heat treatment, the materials used, what's underneath the cover. There's a lot of things that could be going on. So that's it. Basically, I'm sure there's more, but, the more leverage you've got, the more likely it is to get you. For a lot of these things, it applies universally with slip joints. Just position your hand to where usually you should have a kick. If you've got your finger up here and this blade starts to move and you're positioned like this, you're going to feel it. You're going to feel it before it becomes a big danger. But if you've got your hand back here and you're cutting and the blade happens to get caught or pivot, it depends on how much force you're using. You may not notice it, and it may not have a half stop, and a half stop may just actually give it extra force to go that way. And then, bam! Wow, we could lose all fingers with this one. Spay blade, it can do more than spay. So, yeah, just be aware of what you're using, what you're doing, and speak softly and carry a big knife. Oh, big knife. But yeah, there you go. I've rambled on too long. The rain has finally stopped. We've been going through a monsoon here. So yeah, there you go. That's just a few of the safety tips, you know, and different type of locking mechanisms are stronger than other ones, but all of them have the potential of failing if you're abusing it or you're not aware of it. And I mean, some of them are just natural. I mean, your fingers are going to be right here, and you kind of have to hold it. You're expecting that that little piece of metal right there to hold against that piece of metal. And if they're both of equal hardness, that's fine. But I found out on some of these, this D2 is definitely Rockwell hardened more than that pivot thing right there. Now, you've got the whole mass of that little notch right there to help hold it in, and the locking bar, you know, to keep it from going completely back. So, I mean, it's fairly safe. There's some things that we're just going to have to, you know, trust it on and stuff, but if you use the right tool for the job, you would probably be using a fixed blade in many situations instead of a folder, and you're just doing it because of convenience. Sometimes, you know, get up, even though you're in the middle of a project, just get up, walk over to where you've got the tool. It's only like less than a minute away. Go get it instead of risking either breaking your tool or breaking yourself from doing something stupid. I still have all my fingers after all these years. I got all my fingers and my thumbs and all my toes. I've got punctures in all of them and cuts and stuff, but they're still there. So that's my expertise on it. Is I've done a lot of stupid things, but I haven't done it completely stupid enough. And if you've done it, you know, a lot of this is just luck on my part. It's not that I'm super skilled or I'm super special or anything. It's just that sometimes I got lucky. You know, I've done a lot of stupid things with knives and moved my foot at just the right time, and bam, you know, or done crazy stuff with a knife and gotten away with it. But sooner or later, sharp objects want to cut, and they don't care what it is they cut. They will cut you and laugh about it. So, thanks for watching, and have a nice day.